Cancel it, or I'll tell everyone our secret. 7 words. That's all it took to turn my ordinary Friday night into something I'd never recover from. I sat motionless at my table in Bellini's, a glass of wine suspended in my grip, while Victoria Kane materialized beside me like a storm front rolling in without warning. Red silk dress, chestnut waves, catching the candlelight like something out of a painting. Her fingers came to rest on my shoulder, possessive, deliberate, and her perfume wrapped around me. Something expensive and dangerous, like everything about her. My blind date, a sweet kindergarten teacher named Megan that my sister had sworn was perfect for you, looked between us with the expression of a woman who'd accidentally walked onto a movie set. She had no idea, neither did I, really. Only that the most powerful woman in Chicago had just issued me an ultimatum, and the secret she was threatening to expose had been burning a hole through my chest for 3 weeks. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 29 years old, a mid-level financial strategist at Kane Industries, and until 3 weeks ago, I was nobody. I'm not anyone special, just another suit in a building full of them. The kind of guy who shows up early, leaves late, and hopes that maybe, someday, someone important will notice the work I do. My apartment is a 1-bedroom in Lincoln Park that I can barely afford. My routine is predictable. Coffee from the same lobby cart every morning, the same sandwich from the same deli every lunch, the same empty apartment every night. Kane Industries headquarters rises 42 stories above Michigan Avenue, all glass and steel and ambition. My desk sits on the 34th floor, close enough to see the corner office where Victoria Kane makes decisions that move markets, far enough to feel completely invisible. I've worked there for 3 years. 3 years of crunching numbers, building models, and watching other people get promoted while I stayed exactly where I was. Comfortable, safe, forgettable. My older sister Sarah worries about me. She calls every Sunday, asks if I've met anyone, sighs dramatically when I tell her I've been too busy with work. 2 weeks ago, she took matters into her own hands. Her name is Megan Torres, she'd said, texting me a photo of a pretty brunette with warm eyes and a gentle smile. She teaches kindergarten. She's kind, she's funny, and she doesn't care about corporate nonsense. You need someone real, Daniel. I'd agreed to the date, mostly to get her off my back. I hadn't dated seriously in over a year, hadn't really wanted to. The truth was, I'd stopped believing anyone would look at me and see something worth keeping. The irony, of course, was that someone already had. The one person I should have avoided at all costs. You have to understand something about Victoria Kane. She wasn't just my boss. She wasn't just the CEO. She was the kind of woman people whispered about in elevators. The kind whose photograph appeared in Forbes and Bloomberg and every Chicago society page that mattered. They called her the Velvet Hammer. At 31, she'd inherited her father's crumbling real estate empire, a company hemorrhaging money, drowning in bad investments and worse leadership. Everyone expected her to fail. The business world was placing bets on how quickly she'd run it into the ground. Instead, she burned it down and rebuilt it from the ashes. Within 3 years, Kane Industries had transformed into a billion-dollar conglomerate spanning tech, media, and luxury development. Victoria had fired entire departments without blinking. She'd destroyed competitors with a single phone call. She'd walked into boardrooms full of men who underestimated her and walked out owning everything they thought they controlled. I'd seen her move through the office like she owned not just the building, but the air inside it. The way her chestnut hair caught the light in every photograph. The way her eyes, sharp, piercing, missing nothing, could make a CFO twice her age stumble over his own words. She was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, elegant, precise, dangerous. When I started at Kane Industries 3 years ago, I never expected to speak to her directly. She existed in a different stratosphere, the 40th floor corner office, the rarefied air where people like me never ventured. I watched her from a distance like everyone else, admired her, feared her. I never imagined she'd notice me. 3 weeks ago she did. The Harrington deal was supposed to be routine, a mid-size acquisition that no one expected to be complicated. But when I dug into the numbers, I found discrepancies, hidden liabilities, a tax structure that would have cost the company millions if we'd closed without adjustments. I stayed late every night for 2 weeks, rebuilding the financial model from scratch. I submitted my analysis to my department head, expecting it to disappear into the corporate void like everything else I'd ever done. Instead, I got a call from the 40th floor. "Miss Kane wants to see you," her assistant had said. "Tonight, her office, 9 o'clock. I'd never been to the 40th floor. The elevator ride felt like ascending to Olympus, each floor ticking by while my heart hammered against my ribs. When the doors opened, I found myself in a space that felt more like a penthouse than an office. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The city glittering 40 stories below, a carpet of lights stretching to the horizon. And there she was. Victoria stood by the window, a glass of champagne in her hand, her silhouette framed against the Chicago skyline. She'd removed her blazer, just a silk blouse now, sleeves rolled to her elbows. More human than I'd ever seen her. "Daniel Mercer," she said, turning, "the man who just saved my company $12 million. I didn't know what to say. I stood there, frozen, while she crossed the room and handed me a glass of champagne. "Drink with me," she said. "I don't like celebrating alone." We talked for hours. About the deal at first, the numbers, the strategy, the satisfaction of finding what everyone else had missed. But then the conversation shifted. She asked about my background, my education, why I'd chosen finance. I found myself telling her things I'd never told anyone at work, about my father's disappointment that I hadn't become a doctor like my brother, about the constant feeling of being invisible in a family of overachievers. She listened, really listened. And when she talked about inheriting her father's company, about the weight of expectations that never let up, I realized we weren't so different. Somewhere around midnight, the champagne bottle was empty, and she was standing close enough that I could smell her perfume. "You know what I've noticed about you, Daniel?" she said softly, her eyes searching my face. "You see things other people miss, not just in spreadsheets, in people." "I don't know about that." "I do." She stepped closer. "No one looks at me and sees anything but the company, the title, the reputation." Her voice dropped. "But you looked at me tonight like I was just me." I should have stepped back. Should have remembered who she was, who I was, the million reasons this was a terrible idea. Instead, I stayed perfectly still as she leaned in. Her lips met mine, and the world stopped. She tasted like champagne and something desperate, something hungry that had been buried for too long. My hands found her waist, pulled her closer, and for one perfect moment, nothing else existed. Not the company, not the power differential, not the voice in my head screaming that this would destroy everything. Just her, just us, just the truth neither of us could say out loud. Then she pulled away. Her eyes were wide, flooded with something that looked terrifyingly like fear. She stepped back. One hand pressed to her lips, and I watched the walls go up in real time. The armor sliding back into place, the vulnerability vanishing behind polished steel. "This never happened," she whispered. "Do you understand me, Daniel? Never." I understood. I went home that night and buried the memory so deep I almost convinced myself it was a dream, a champagne-induced hallucination, a moment of madness that existed outside the real world. But the next 3 weeks told me otherwise. Victoria walked past my desk like I was furniture. In meetings, her gaze swept over me without stopping, like I'd become invisible again. Like that night in her office had erased me entirely. I'd catch glimpses of her in the hallway, and she'd look right through me. The message was clear. Forget it ever happened. So I tried. I failed. Bellini's was exactly the kind of restaurant my sister would choose. Warm amber lighting, white tablecloths, soft jazz. The kind of place that makes ordinary people feel sophisticated. I arrived early, claimed my table, and tried to convince myself this was a good idea. Megan Torres arrived right on time, looking lovely in a floral dress that matched her warm personality. She was pretty in an approachable way, the kind of woman who smiled easily and made everyone around her feel comfortable. "I hope you don't mind," she said, settling into her seat across from me. "I'm a little nervous." Blind dates are always so awkward, aren't they? They really are, I agreed, surprised to find myself smiling. She told me about her classroom, her students, the chaos of teaching 5-year-olds how to share crayons. Her laugh was bright and genuine. She asked about my work, and when I started explaining financial modeling, she tilted her head and said, "I have absolutely no idea what that means, but you sound passionate about it." She was exactly what my sister wanted for me. Kind, grounded, normal. I couldn't focus on any of it. My mind kept drifting back to a corner office 40 stories above the city, to champagne and confession, to lips against mine and the terrifying tenderness that came after. "Daniel?" Megan's voice cut through my thoughts. "You okay? You seem a little distracted." "Sorry," I said, shaking my head. "Long week at work." She smiled understandingly. "Sarah warned me you were a workaholic. She also said you needed someone to drag you out of your head once in a while." I opened my mouth to respond. And then the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. I felt it before I saw it. A prickling at the back of my neck. The way conversations around us seemed to falter. Heads turning toward the entrance. The particular silence that falls when someone important walks into a room. I looked up. Victoria Kane stood in the doorway. The red silk dress clung to her figure like it had been painted on, catching the light with every movement. Her chestnut hair cascaded past her shoulders in waves that belonged on a magazine cover. She moved through the restaurant like she owned it, which, knowing her, she probably did. and she was looking directly at me. Megan followed my gaze, her eyes widening. "Oh my God, is that? I've seen her on the news. She's that billionaire, right? The one who—" She stopped, noticing my expression. "Daniel, do you know her?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't breathe. Victoria crossed the restaurant with purpose, her heels clicking against the hardwood, her eyes never leaving mine. Every step felt like a countdown to detonation. When she reached our table, her hand came to rest on the back of my chair. Her finger brushed my shoulder, possessive, deliberate, and she leaned down close enough that her perfume enveloped me. "Daniel," she said, her voice silk, wrapped around a blade. "We need to talk." Megan looked between us, bewildered and suddenly uncertain. "I'm sorry, is something wrong? Are you his girlfriend?" Victoria's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Her eyes flickered to Megan with surgical precision, assessing and dismissing her in a single glance. "Something like that." She turned back to me, her mouth brushing against my ear, and whispered 7 words that changed everything. "Cancel it, or I'll tell everyone our secret." My heart slammed against my ribs. My mind raced through every possible response, every escape route, every scenario where this ended without my life imploding. I found none. Megan was staring at me now, hurt and confusion warring on her face. "Daniel, what's going on? What secret?" But I couldn't look at her. I could only look at Victoria, at the fear beneath her flawless composure, at the desperation hiding behind her threat. The Velvet Hammer had just declared war on my Friday night, and I had no idea if I was her enemy or her only ally. I turned to Megan, my mind scrambling for words that would make any of this make sense. "I'm so sorry," I managed. There's a work emergency. I have to—" "A work emergency?" Megan's voice was small, her eyes flicking between me and Victoria. "Daniel, she just called herself your girlfriend. What's going on?" "It's complicated." "Complicated." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what? I think I understand perfectly." She grabbed her purse from the back of her chair and stood, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Tell your sister not to set me up with anyone else, okay? I'm done with blind dates." "Megan, wait!" But she was already walking away, weaving between tables toward the exit without looking back. I watched her go, guilt pooling in my stomach like cold water. Victoria's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Daniel, now." I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and followed her toward the back of the restaurant. Every eye in the room tracked our movement. The whispers had already started, phones appearing beneath tables, and I knew by morning this would be all over the Chicago gossip sites. Victoria led me to a private alcove near the wine cellar, tucked behind a velvet curtain that muffled the jazz and conversation from the main dining room. The moment we were alone, the transformation was immediate. Her composure cracked. "What the hell were you thinking?" she hissed, spinning to face me. Her voice was desperate now, stripped of its usual authority. Her hands, I noticed, were trembling. A date? Tonight? Of all the nights, what was I thinking? The anger I'd been burying for 3 weeks surged to the surface, hot and sudden. I was thinking that I'm a single adult who's allowed to have dinner with someone. I was thinking that you told me to forget what happened between us. I was thinking— I know what I said. Then why are you here, Victoria? I stepped closer, surprising myself with my boldness. You spent 3 weeks pretending I don't exist, walking past my desk like I'm furniture, avoiding eye contact in every meeting. And now you show up at my date and threaten to expose some secret that you told me never happened? She flinched. Actually flinched, like my words had landed somewhere tender. You don't understand, she said quietly. Then help me understand. Because from where I'm standing, you're the one who doesn't get to be angry right now. For a long moment, she just stared at me. The candlelight from the main room filtered through the curtain, casting shifting shadows across her face. In that dim light, she didn't look like the woman who terrorized boardrooms. She looked exhausted, scared, human. My ex-husband is here, she finally said. Marcus, he's at the bar. I blinked, thrown by the sudden shift. Your ex-husband? Don't look. Her hand shot out, gripping my forearm. Not yet, he's watching. He's been watching since I walked in. I forced myself to stay still, though every instinct screamed to turn around. What does that have to do with me? Victoria closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, something had broken behind them. The armor was gone. Marcus and I divorced 2 years ago. He was on the board. His family had invested heavily in Kane Industries before my father died. When I took over, he expected me to fail, expected to swoop in and save the company. Her laugh was bitter. He didn't expect me to succeed, and he's never forgiven me for it. So he's, what, trying to sabotage you? He's been telling everyone who'll listen that I'm cold, incapable of connection, that I drove him away because I can't let anyone close. Her voice cracked on the last word. There's a merger vote in 2 weeks, Daniel. Orison Global. It's worth $3 billion, and it's everything I've worked toward for 3 years. But if the board thinks I'm unstable, if Marcus convinces them I'm a liability, the merger falls apart. And so does everything else. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening in the low light. He's been whispering to investors, to board members, painting me as some kind of emotional wreck who'll crack under pressure. And tonight, she stopped, her jaw tightening. Tonight what? Tonight he walked in with his new fiancée, 26 years old, blonde, draped over him like a damn accessory. He saw me come in alone, and then he saw you sitting there with some other woman, and he smiled, Daniel. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He's at the bar right now watching me prove every terrible thing he's ever said about me. I didn't know what to say. I'd never seen Victoria like this. Raw, desperate, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. What happened between you two? I asked quietly. Really? For a long moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible. I got pregnant. A year into our marriage. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at some point over my shoulder, lost in memory. I was so scared. I'd just taken over the company. I was drowning in work, and suddenly there was this possibility, this thing I hadn't planned for. She paused. I lost the baby at 11 weeks. Victoria, Marcus told me I was weak. The words came out flat, dead. He said a real woman would have been able to hold on to it. That I was too cold, too focused on work, too incapable of nurturing anything except profit margins. She finally met my eyes, and the pain there nearly broke me. That was when I knew I had to leave. But he spent every day since then making sure the world sees me exactly the way he does. I glanced toward the main dining room, and this time I let myself look toward the bar. He was exactly as she'd described. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of polished confidence that came from a lifetime of never being told no. The blonde beside him was laughing at something he said, her hand on his chest. But Marcus wasn't looking at her. He was looking at us. His smile was smug, satisfied, the smile of a man watching his ex-wife fall apart in public. Something hot and protective surged through my chest. "What do you want from me?" I asked, turning back to Victoria. Her eyes searched my face. "I want you to be mine. Just for tonight. Just long enough to wipe that smile off his face. A performance." Yes. But even as she said it, something flickered across her expression, something that looked almost like hope. Just for tonight. I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain was screaming about power dynamics and professional boundaries and the million ways this could destroy my career. But then I remembered the way she'd looked at me 3 weeks ago. The way she'd kissed me like the world was ending. The way she'd whispered this never happened with fear flooding her eyes. Not because she didn't want it, but because she was terrified of wanting anything at all. "The night in your office," I said slowly. "Was that a performance too?" Victoria's breath caught. "Daniel?" Because it didn't feel like one. It felt like the first real thing that had happened to me in years. I stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse jumping in her throat. "So before I agree to this, I need to know, was any of it real?" She looked at me for a long moment, really looked at me. The way she had that night when the city glittered 40 stories below us and nothing existed except the space between our bodies. "No one looks at me and sees anything but the company," she said softly. "The title, the reputation. But you," she reached up, her fingers brushing my jaw. "You saw me. For one moment that night you saw me, and it terrified me." "It terrified you that someone saw you?" "It terrified me that I wanted you to." The words hung between us, heavy with everything we hadn't said. I could feel the heat of her hand against my skin, could smell her perfume. That same dangerous, expensive scent from that night in her office. "Okay," I heard myself say, "I'll do it." Relief flooded her features, followed quickly by something that looked almost like gratitude. "Thank you. I know I don't deserve—" "Don't," I shook my head. "You don't have to thank me, just don't pretend I'm furniture again after tonight. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I can't do that again." "I won't." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I promise." We walked back into the main dining room together, and this time my hand found hers. Victoria's fingers interlaced with mine, her grip warm and steady. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and suddenly the velvet hammer was back. But there was something different now, something softer underneath. We passed the bar together, and I made sure Marcus got a good look. His smile faltered. The blonde fiancé looked between us with open confusion, but Marcus's expression was curdling, that smug satisfaction dissolving into something bitter and uncertain. Victoria laughed at something I murmured, a genuine laugh, bright and unexpected, that made heads turn throughout the restaurant. She leaned into me, her shoulder brushing mine, and the chemistry between us was palpable. We returned to my table, now empty, Megan's wine glass still half full where she'd abandoned it, and Victoria slid into the seat across from me like she belonged there. "I'm sorry about your date," she said, something genuine in her tone. That wasn't fair to her. "No, it wasn't," I signaled the waiter. "But she'll be okay. My sister will probably kill me, though." "Your sister?" "She's the one who set it up. She thinks I work too much." Victoria's lips curved. Smart woman. The waiter appeared discreet and professional, and took our orders without acknowledging the obvious drama he'd witnessed. When he left, Victoria leaned back in her chair and studied me. "Tell me something about yourself," she said. "Something that has nothing to do with work." I blinked, surprised by the request. "Like what?" "Anything. Your family, your hobbies, the thing you wanted to be when you were 8 years old." It felt strange. This woman who controlled empires, asking me about my childhood dreams. But something in her expression was genuine, hungry for connection in a way I recognized. So I told her about Sarah, my overachieving sister who worried too much, about my parents' divorce when I was 12, and my dad's remarriage to a woman who made it clear I'd never be as good as her own sons, about the feeling of being invisible in my own family, of never quite being enough. And then Victoria told me about her father, the impossible expectations, the constant criticism, the way he'd groomed her to take over the company while simultaneously making her feel like she'd never deserve it. "He died 3 days after I turned 31, she said quietly. "Heart attack. Right in the middle of a board meeting. I was in London, closing a deal he'd said I wasn't ready for." She paused. "I didn't even get to say goodbye." "I'm sorry. Don't be." He would have hated sympathy. She smiled, but it was sad. "He would have hated a lot of things I've done since then, but I hope, he'd be proud of what I built." The conversation flowed easier after that. We talked about music, about travel, about the books we'd loved as children and the dreams we'd given up along the way. The performance faded into something genuine and somewhere between the appetizers and dessert. I realized I wasn't pretending anymore. I glanced toward the bar at one point and saw that Marcus was gone. He and his fiancée had slipped out without my noticing. "They left," I said. Victoria followed my gaze, and a small, satisfied smile crossed her features. "Good." Her hand found mine under the table, her fingers squeezing once. "I haven't felt this in years," she whispered, like I could actually deregulate breathe. We lingered over coffee until the restaurant began to empty, neither of us wanting to break the spell. Finally, the waiter brought the check. Victoria paid before I could reach for my wallet, and we stepped out into the cold Chicago night. The city glittered around us, buildings reaching toward the stars. Victoria pulled her wrap tighter against the chill, and I watched the way her breath fogged in the air. "There's a retreat next weekend," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Lake Geneva. The Orison executives will be there, and several board members. I'll need to—" She hesitated. "I'll need a partner. For appearances." I heard what she wasn't saying. "I'll need you." "For appearances," I repeated. "Yes." But when she finally looked at me, her eyes told a different story. "Just a weekend. You'd have your own room. I wouldn't ask you to." I kissed her. I didn't plan it. Didn't think about it. One moment she was making excuses, building walls, and the next my hands were in her hair, and her back was against the cold stone of the building, and she was kissing me back with a desperation that stole my breath. When we finally broke apart, her eyes were wide, her composure completely shattered. "Daniel, I'll come to Lake Geneva," I said, "but not for appearances and not because you're my boss." I brushed a strand of chestnut hair from her face. "I'll come because I want to, because whatever this is, it's real, at least it is to me." She stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. "I'll send a car," she whispered. "Friday evening." A Blacktown car pulled up to the curb. Victoria squeezed my hand once, then slipped inside, the door closing behind her. Through the tinted window, I caught one last glimpse of her face before the car pulled away. I watched her disappear into the Chicago night, knowing I should walk away, knowing I wouldn't. The velvet hammer had found my weakness, and I was beginning to suspect I'd found hers. The car arrived Friday at 6, just as she'd promised. Lake Geneva was 2 hours north of Chicago, but it felt like entering another world entirely. The estate where the retreat was being held sprawled across a private peninsula, all stone walls and floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place where fortunes were made and lost over brandy and handshakes. Victoria met me in the lobby, dressed in a cream silk blouse and tailored slacks, her chestnut hair pulled back in an elegant twist. She looked every inch the CEO, but when our eyes met, something softened in her expression. "You came?" she said quietly. I said I would. She led me to our suite, a sprawling space with 2 bedrooms separated by a shared living area. Her boundaries carefully maintained. I didn't push. The weekend was a performance at first. Victoria introduced me to board members and Orison executives, her hand resting on my arm with practiced ease. I played the part of the devoted partner, charming when needed, silent when appropriate. We smiled for photographs and made small talk over champagne. But the nights were different. After the dinners ended and the other guests retreated, Victoria and I would sit in the moonlit study talking until 3 a.m. She told me about her childhood, the impossible expectations, the father who'd groomed her to take over while constantly reminding her she'd never be good enough. I told her about mine, the divorce, the stepmother, the brother who'd become a surgeon while I became invisible. "You're not invisible," she said one night, her voice soft in the darkness. "Not to me." The second night she kissed me. We were standing by the window, the lake shimmering silver under a full moon, and she turned to me with something urgent in her eyes. "This isn't pretend anymore," she whispered. "I need you to know that." When her lips met mine, there was no performance in it, no audience to impress, just the truth we'd both been running from. That night, we stopped pretending entirely. We returned to Chicago on Sunday, and for 2 weeks, we were careful. At work, we maintained professional distance. Victoria walked past my desk with only the briefest nod. I addressed her as Ms. Kane in meetings. But there were stolen glances across crowded rooms. Late-night texts that made me smile at my phone like an idiot. Evenings at her penthouse, where we cooked dinner together and talked about everything except what would happen if anyone found out. I should have known it couldn't last. Lauren Chen had worked at Kane Industries for 8 years. She was a senior analyst, brilliant, ambitious, and bitter. 3 months earlier, I'd received a promotion she'd been expecting. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I'd assumed my work on the Harrington deal had simply caught someone's attention. I was right. It had caught Victoria's. What I didn't know was that Lauren had been watching, photographing, documenting. The emergency board meeting was called 3 days before the Orison merger vote. I walked into the conference room to find Victoria seated at the head of the table, her expression carved from marble. Around her sat a dozen board members, their faces grim. And at the far end, smiling like a cat with a canary, was Marcus Kane. "Mr. Mercer," said the board chairman, a silver-haired man named Harrison Webb. "Thank you for joining us. Please sit." I sat. My stomach was ice. "We've received some concerning information," Webb continued, sliding a folder across the table. "Photographs, hotel receipts, timestamps that suggest an inappropriate relationship between yourself and Ms. Kane." The folder contained everything. Victoria and me at Bellini's, entering her building together, leaving the Lake Geneva estate Sunday morning. Lauren had been thorough. "This is a serious accusation," Webb said. "An inappropriate relationship between a CEO and a subordinate raises questions of judgment, favoritism, and professional ethics. Questions that could jeopardize the Orison merger." Marcus leaned forward, his expression carefully sympathetic. "I think we all know Victoria has struggled with stability since our divorce. I've tried to stay quiet about it, but this pattern of impulsive behavior." "Marcus," Victoria's voice was ice, "if you're going to lie about me, at least be creative." "I'm not lying. I'm concerned." He spread his hands. "The board deserves to know if their CEO is compromising herself and the company for a fling with an employee." The word fling hit me like a slap. I watched Victoria's jaw tighten, saw the fractures forming beneath her composure. "Mr. Mercer," Webb said, turning to me, "we need your testimony. Is this relationship genuine, or is it professional manipulation? Were you pressured into this arrangement by Miss Kane?" Every eye in the room was on me. I could feel Victoria's gaze burning into the side of my face, but I couldn't look at her. Not yet. This was the moment. The safe answer was obvious: deny everything. Call it a misunderstanding. Protect my career. Protect her empire. Let the whole thing dissolve into corporate damage control. But I thought about Lake Geneva, about the woman who'd let her walls down in the moonlight, about the look in her eyes when she said, "This isn't pretend anymore." I thought about spending the rest of my life being invisible. I'm in love with her. The room went silent. Victoria's eyes flew to mine, wide with shock and something else. Hope, maybe. Fear. "I'm in love with her," I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I don't care who knows it. I wasn't pressured. I wasn't manipulated. I'm here because Victoria Kane is the only person who has ever made me feel like I was worth seeing." I looked at Marcus, letting him see everything I felt. This isn't a fling. And it isn't a scandal. It's the most real thing that's ever happened to me. The silence stretched. Board members exchanged glances. Marcus's face had gone red with fury. This is exactly what I warned you about, he snarled. She's manipulated another man into defending her. It's what she does. She's incapable of genuine— Enough! Victoria stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, the velvet hammer rising. I will not resign, she said, her voice carrying the authority of a woman who'd built an empire from ashes. But I will remove myself from the Orison negotiations to eliminate any conflict of interest. The relationship is real. It is also none of this board's business. She straightened her blazer and looked Marcus directly in the eye. However, since we're discussing inappropriate behavior, perhaps we should examine the documents I received this morning. Documents showing that Marcus has been feeding confidential merger information to a competing firm for the past 6 months. The room erupted. 20 minutes later, Marcus was escorted out by security. The board voted unanimously to retain Victoria as CEO. The Orison merger was approved the following week. But when I found Victoria afterward, standing alone in her corner office, she didn't look victorious. She looked devastated. This was never supposed to be real, she whispered, not looking at me. I've put everything you have at risk. Your career, your reputation, everything. Victoria, I need time. She finally met my eyes, and the pain there broke something in my chest. I'm sorry, Daniel. I need time. She left the next day, handed operations to her COO, disappeared without another word. 2 months of silence. I threw myself into work, turned down a promotion that everyone assumed I'd slept my way into, ignored the whispers and the pitying looks, and my sister's careful questions about that woman from the news. I couldn't explain what I'd lost. How do you explain losing something you'd only just found? Then on a cold Tuesday evening, I walked into Bellini's. I don't know why. Nostalgia, maybe. Masochism. The need to sit in the place where everything had started and try to make sense of how it had ended. But when I stepped through the door, I stopped breathing. She was there. Same table, same red dress. A glass of wine sat untouched before her, and when she looked up and saw me, her expression was something I'd never seen on Victoria Kane before. Uncertainty, hope, fear. I crossed the restaurant without thinking. She stood as I approached, her hands twisting together in a way that seemed almost nervous. I heard you turn down the promotion, she said. I didn't want to be the guy who slept his way up. No? Her voice was barely a whisper. Then what do you want to be? I looked at her. This woman who had crashed into my life and turned it upside down, who had made me feel visible for the first time in years, who had run away because feeling something real terrified her more than any boardroom battle ever could. I want to be the guy you come back to, I said. Her breath caught. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume. That dangerous, expensive scent I'd never be able to forget. You'd rather be the guy who made a billionaire fall in love with him? My heart stopped. Victoria. No more secrets, she said, her voice breaking. No more hiding. I'm tired of pretending I don't want this. What changed? She reached up, her hand finding the back of my head, her fingers threading through my hair with a tenderness that made my chest ache. You told a room full of people who could destroy your career that you loved me. You didn't have to. You chose to. Her forehead came to rest against mine. No one has ever chosen me before, Daniel. No one has ever looked at what it would cost them and decided I was worth it anyway. You are, I whispered. You always were. When she kissed me, there was no fear in it, no performance, no audience, just the truth we'd both been running from, finally allowed to breathe. We left the restaurant together, her hand warm in mine. The Chicago night wrapped around us, cold and glittering and full of possibility. There would be challenges ahead, board members to face, gossip to weather, a relationship to build in the harsh light of public scrutiny. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. And for the first time in hers, Victoria Kane had let someone see her, really see her, and been loved for it. She squeezed my hand as we walked toward the waiting car. "What now?" she asked. I looked at her, this impossible woman who had changed everything, and smiled. "Now we stop hiding." She smiled back, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I didn't find love that night in the restaurant. I found the courage to stop hiding from it. And sometimes that's the only secret worth keeping.